Marianne Hobbs saw him first. She was in the passenger seat of the farm truck while her husband Glenn drove across the Maury River Bridge on Route 39 outside of Lexington, Virginia. It was a Tuesday in November, 6:30 in the morning, dark enough that the headlights were still on, cold enough that the frost on the windshield hadn't fully cleared. And there was a man sitting under the bridge, not lying down, sitting, back against the concrete abutment, a sleeping bag around his shoulders that looked like it had been through more weather than fabric should survive. A pack beside him, boots that were held together with what appeared to be duct tape. Glenn kept driving. Marianne looked in the side mirror until the bridge disappeared. They didn't talk about it during chores. They fed the cattle, 38 Angus cross cows and 1 bull on 160 acres of Shenandoah Valley grass that Glenn's family had been running since his grandfather bought the place in 1951. The morning routine was the same as every morning. Hay out, water checked, head count done. The kind of work that fills your hands while your mind goes somewhere else. Marianne's mind went to the bridge. At breakfast, she said what Glenn was hoping she wouldn't say. There's a man living under the Maury River Bridge. Glenn buttered his toast. I saw him. It's going to be 22 degrees tonight, I know. Glenn? He set down his knife. What do you want me to do, Marianne? We can't even afford to fix the barn roof. I've got 38 cows and a mortgage that's 3 months behind. I can't take on somebody else's problems. Marianne didn't argue. She just looked at him. The look she'd been giving him for 31 years of marriage that meant, you already know what's right. You just don't want to pay for it. Glenn drove to the bridge at 4 that afternoon, alone. He parked the truck on the shoulder and walked down the embankment to where the man was sitting. Up close, the man was younger than Glenn expected. Maybe 43, 44. Hard to tell because the road and the cold had added years that didn't belong to him. His face was lean. His hands were steady, not shaking, which Glenn noticed because men who drink shake, and this man wasn't shaking. His eyes were clear and direct and carried the specific kind of wariness that comes from being looked at by people who've already decided you're a problem. He was wearing a jacket with a patch on the left shoulder. Faded, but Glenn recognized it. 3rd Infantry Division, the Marne Division, Fort Stewart. Glenn's father had been 3rd Infantry, Korea, 1952. You serve? Glenn asked. The man looked at him for a moment, deciding something. Then, 2 tours, Afghanistan, 09 and 11. Glenn nodded. My father was 3rd ID, Korea. Something shifted in the man's expression. Not softening exactly. Recognition. The acknowledgement between 2 people who share a language that doesn't require explanation. What's your name? Marcus. Marcus Hale. Glenn Hobbs. My wife and I run a farm up the road. She saw you this morning and hasn't stopped looking at me since. Marcus almost smiled. She wants you to do something about me. She wants me to offer you supper and a place to sleep that isn't under a bridge in November. What you do with the offer is your business. Marcus studied Glenn for a long time. The wariness didn't leave his eyes, but something next to it made room. I don't take charity. I'm not offering charity. I'm offering supper. There's a difference. Marcus picked up his pack, followed Glenn to the truck, sat in the passenger seat without speaking for the 3-mile drive to the farm. When they pulled into the driveway, Marcus looked at the property. The white farmhouse with the sagging porch, the barn with the blue tarp on the roof where the tin had blown off, the pasture rolling down toward the river, and the cattle standing at the hay ring in the last light of the day. You run this alone? Marcus asked. Me and Marianne. Our kids are in Richmond and Charlotte. They come at Thanksgiving if the weather's good. Marcus looked at the barn, the tarp, the fence line with 3 posts leaning. Your barn needs a roof. I know. Your fence needs posts. I know that too. Marcus didn't say anything else. He ate supper, slept in the spare bedroom that used to be their daughter's. And at 5:15 the next morning, when Glenn walked out to start chores, Marcus was already at the barn. He'd pulled the tarp off the roof section, stacked the damaged tin sheets, measured the gap, and was standing there with a look that said, Do you have tin and screws, or do I need to go find some? Glenn stood in the yard holding his coffee. Marcus, you don't have to do that. I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it because I can't sleep in a house where the barn roof is open and not fix it. It's a problem. I fix problems. It's what I was trained to do. That was the first morning. There were many more. Marcus stayed. Not because Glenn offered a job. He couldn't afford to pay wages. Not because Marianne made the spare bedroom into something permanent. Though she did, quietly, the way wives make decisions by moving furniture and hanging towels. Marcus stayed because the farm had problems and his hands needed problems. He fixed the barn roof in 3 days using salvaged tin from an equipment shed that Glenn had been meaning to tear down for 5 years. He reset 11 fence posts along the south line using a manual post driver because the hydraulic one was broken, and Marcus didn't ask about the hydraulic one. He repaired the loading chute that had been unusable since the previous spring when a cow had bent the headgate. Glenn watched all of this happening and felt two things simultaneously: gratitude and shame. Gratitude because the work was getting done. Shame because a man living under a bridge was doing work that Glenn had been putting off for years because he was too tired and too broke and too proud to admit he needed help. After 2 weeks, Glenn asked the question he'd been avoiding. Marcus, what happened? They were sitting in the barn after evening chores. Marcus was sharpening a pair of fencing pliers on a whetstone he'd found in Glenn's toolbox. Marcus didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was the same level tone he always used. Controlled, measured. The voice of a man who'd learned to keep the important things in a container that didn't leak. I came back from the second tour in 2012, couldn't sleep, couldn't sit still, couldn't be in a room with more than 4 people without needing to leave. The VA gave me a diagnosis and some pills. The pills made me sleep, but they didn't make me better. I lost the apartment, lost the job, lost everything except the pack and the boots. He tested the edge of the pliers with his thumb. I've been moving for 3 years. Shelters when it's bad, bridges when it's not. I don't drink, don't use, I just can't stay anywhere. Every room feels like it's closing in. The only place I can breathe is outside, which is a problem when it's 22 degrees. Glenn sat with that for a while. You sleep okay here? Marcus looked at him. First place in 3 years. I think it's the animals. The sound they make at night. The cows moving. The bull breathing. It sounds like... Marcus stopped. Like something safe. I can't explain it better than that. Glenn understood. Not the military part. Not the diagnosis. But the part about the animals. He'd been sleeping next to the sound of cattle his whole life and had never thought about what it would feel like to not hear it. By December, Marcus was part of the operation. Not officially. Glenn still couldn't pay him. But Marcus ate at the table and slept in the room and worked the farm like he'd been doing it his whole life. Turned out he'd grown up on a cattle operation outside of Staunton, 40 miles north. His family had sold when he was 16. The knowledge was still in his hands, even if the years had tried to bury it. And he was especially good with the cattle, patient, quiet. He moved them without raising his voice. He'd be where the cattle needed him to be before they knew they needed him there. Glenn's bull was a 9-year-old Angus named Bishop, 1,300 pounds, the only registered sire in the operation. Bishop's calves had been the backbone of Glenn's income for 7 years. Consistent, moderate-framed, easy-keeping animals that sold well at the Staunton sale every October. But Bishop was 9. His production was declining. His mobility was slower. The vet, Dr. Carla Inman out of Lexington, had told Glenn the previous spring that Bishop had maybe 2 more breeding seasons before age caught up with his joints. You need to be thinking about a replacement, Carla said. A good young bull is going to cost you $4,000 to $6,000, and you need him by next June or you're breeding with a bull that might not cover your cows. Glenn didn't have $4,000. He didn't have $2,000. The mortgage was behind. The hay bill was unpaid. In January, Marianne sat Glenn down at the kitchen table and said the thing they'd both been thinking. We need to sell Bishop. Glenn stared at her. He's our only bull. He's worth $8,000 at auction. Maybe $9,000 given his registration and his track record. That money could pay the mortgage current, cover the hay bill, and leave enough to help Marcus get into the Veterans Housing Program in Staunton. They have openings in February. And then what? We don't have a bull. We can't breed. We can't produce calves. We lose the income that pays for everything. Marianne looked at him with the same expression she'd used at the kitchen table in November. Glenn, that man fixed our barn, fixed our fences, fixed our chute. He's worked every day for 2 months without asking for $1, and he's sleeping in our house because a bridge in November isn't fit for someone who served this country twice. We owe him more than supper. Glenn looked out the window. Bishop was in the near pasture, standing the way old bulls stand in January. Heavy, slow, conserving warmth, 9 years of service, 7 calf crops. The animal that had kept their farm above water when everything else was trying to pull it under. Selling Bishop wasn't just selling a bull, it was selling the last reliable thing on the farm. Glenn called the Staunton livestock auction the next morning. Marcus found out on a Thursday. He overheard Glenn on the phone with the auction house confirming the transport date. That evening, Marcus walked into the kitchen where Glenn and Marianne were eating dinner. "You're selling Bishop." Glenn set down his fork. "Yeah, because of me. Because it's the right thing to do." Marcus stood in the doorway for a long time. His expression was the one Glenn had seen under the bridge. Wariness, pride, the calculation of a man deciding whether to accept something that costs someone else more than he's comfortable with. "I can leave. You don't need to sell your bull for me." Marianne spoke before Glenn could. "You could leave, and we'd go back to driving past that bridge every morning knowing you were under it, and Glenn would stop sleeping again, and I'd stop looking at him, and the farm would keep going the way it's been going, which is slowly into the ground. Or you could let us do this, and you could go to the housing program and get the help the VA should have given you 3 years ago, and we could stop pretending that keeping a bull is more important than keeping a person." The kitchen was quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when something true has been said and nobody can improve on it. Marcus sat down at the table. Didn't eat, didn't speak, just sat. Then, quietly, "Okay. Bishop sold at the Staunton auction on the second Saturday of February for $8,500. Glenn watched from the stands while a bull he'd owned for 7 years walked through the ring and out of his life. The buyer was a seed stock operation from Augusta County who wanted Bishop's genetics for their program. Glenn deposited the check, paid the mortgage current, covered the hay bill, and drove Marcus to the Shenandoah Valley Veterans Housing Program in Staunton, where a caseworker named Dana helped Marcus fill out the paperwork for a 2-bedroom apartment and enrollment in the VA outpatient program. Marcus stood in the parking lot after the intake. Glenn was leaning on the truck. "I'll pay you back," Marcus said. Glenn shook his head. "It's not a loan, it is to me." Glenn drove home. The pasture had 38 cows and no bull. The breeding season was 4 months away. The math that had been difficult before was now impossible. Marianne met him at the door. She didn't ask how it went. She could see it on his face. The face of a man who'd done the right thing and was already paying for it. 6 months later, a Saturday morning in August. Glenn was in the barn when he heard a trailer backing down the driveway. He walked outside. A truck he didn't recognize was pulling a single-axle stock trailer toward the loading chute. The truck was old, but clean. The trailer was borrowed. Glenn could tell because the license plate was from a different county. Marcus stepped out of the driver's side. Glenn stared. Marcus looked different. Not just the clean clothes or the haircut or the weight he'd gained. Something behind his eyes had changed. The wariness was still there. Probably always would be. But the container that held the hard things wasn't leaking anymore. It was just holding. Marcus walked to the back of the trailer, opened the gate. A bull walked down the ramp, young, maybe 2 years old. Angus Hereford cross. Black baldy. Not as big as Bishop. Not registered. Not the kind of animal that sells for $8,000 at a Staunton auction. But a bull. Marcus. Glenn started. "I got a job at the Weaver place in Augusta County. Fencing and cattle work. I've been there 4 months. He pays fair. The apartment is good. The VA is helping." Marcus paused. "I told Mr. Weaver what you did for me. He had this young bull he was going to send to the sale barn. Crossbred. Nothing fancy. but his dam was one of the best cows in Weaver's herd. He let me buy him for $1,200. I've been saving since April. Glenn looked at the bull, then at Marcus, then at the bull again. He's not Bishop, Marcus said. I know that, but he's sound, he's young, and he's yours, because you sold yours for me, and I don't carry debts. Marianne came out of the house, saw the bull, saw Marcus, put her hand over her mouth and stood on the steps for a long time before she could walk to the driveway. She hugged Marcus. He stood still for a moment. The way men stand when they've forgotten what being held feels like. Then his arms came up. Slowly, and he held on. The young bull's name was Sergeant. Marcus named him. Glenn didn't argue. Sergeant's first breeding season was the following June. Glenn turned him out with 38 cows and expected adequate results from a crossbred bull with no pedigree and no reputation. Sergeant bred 35 of 38, 92%, higher than Bishop's last 3 seasons. The calves came in March, and Glenn noticed something that made him call Dr. Inman. These calves are bigger than Bishop's, at birth, and they're gaining faster. Carla drove out, looked at the calves, weighed 3 of them, checked the data against Bishop's last calf crop. Hybrid vigor, she said. Your cows are straight-bred Angus. Bishop was Angus. Sergeant is Angus Hereford. The cross produces heterosis. The calves inherit the best traits from both breeds. More growth, more milk from the dams, more survivability. It's basic genetics, Glenn. Crossbred bulls on straight-bred cows is the fastest way to increase production in a commercial herd. You just never had the cross before because Bishop was the same breed as your cows. Glenn looked at the calves, bigger, faster, healthier, from a $1,200 bull that a veteran bought with 4 months of fence-building wages. At the Staunton sale that October, Glenn's calves sold for an average of $940 a head, $60 above the previous year's average with Bishop, the best calf crop Glenn had produced in a decade. Marcus drives down from Staunton once a month, helps Glenn with whatever needs doing, fixes things that aren't broken yet because that's how Marcus sees the world. Problems that haven't happened are still problems. He and Glenn don't talk about the bridge, don't talk about the sale, don't talk about the $1,200 bull that outproduced the $8,000 bull. They talk about fence posts and hay prices and the weather and whether Sergeant's calves will top the sale again this year. They talk the way men talk when the important things have already been settled and all that's left is the work. Marianne watches them from the kitchen window sometimes. 2 men in a pasture, one who almost lost his farm, one who almost lost everything, connected by a bull that neither of them planned on and both of them needed. She told her daughter on the phone once, "Your father sold the best animal on this farm for a stranger under a bridge, and the stranger brought back something better. Not because the bull was better, because the man was." Sergeant is 4 now. His calves still top the sale. Glenn's mortgage is current. The barn has a real roof. The fences are tight. And every morning at 5:15 when Glenn walks out to start chores, Marcus's truck is already in the driveway. Because some debts aren't paid with money. They're paid by showing up. Every morning, without being asked, until the person who helped you understands that the help went both ways.